All right, so folks, we're going to talk a little bit about monitoring. Hold on, I got to get this. About one of the issues that we have, or that we have encountered, and that we think is really, really important with CO2 sequestration. Now, you know, okay, well, that's CO2 sequestration. And you all know what CO2 sequestration is. It's part of the CCUS process, the carbon capture and utilization, where they capture the carbon, they transport it somewhere if they can get a permit, and then they store it in the ground. Or maybe they use it to manufacture eyeglasses, better cement, all sorts of things like that. But what I'm interested in, because I'm a seismic monitoring company, is putting it in the ground and making sure that it stays there. Now, there's a lot of talk about CCUS these days. A lot of talk. Not so much action, but a lot of talk. A couple of years ago, I hired a marketing firm to do a study on how big the CCUS market could become. And they produced this diagram for me. And I did this back in 2019. They had numbers from 2018, and they predicted that the market, these are all from all sorts of different analytic companies, and they predicted that the market would get upwards of $14 billion. You know, this was completely wrong. Today, if I ask those same guys to do this study, those numbers would be twice as big as that. So there is a lot of prediction that the CCUS market is going to be really strong. Now, a lot of prediction that makes my bosses say, Peter, you better go out there and get involved in this market because there's a lot of money to be made. Perfect. And a lot of that money is being driven by the federal government, the Department of Energy, who have announced $12 billion in funding to help the different steps in that chain to develop. And one of them, you can see, $2.5 billion on carbon storage, validation, and testing. The sort of stuff that Microseismic wants to do. So we felt we needed to get involved with this business, and in fact, we applied for a DOE part of that $2.5 billion, and they gave us some of the money to take our current technology, as we've been practicing it for years, and bring it to bear on the sequestration problem. So where can we, with passive seismic, have an influence on the sequestration problem? The one I am most interested here in this talk is to understand, as you must, whether there are active faults in the area where you're going to put the CO2, and whether or not the injection of the CO2 in those faults is going to cause them to be lubricated and allow for bigger events to take place. That's a pretty well-known phenomenon, and you need to be concerned before you invest hundreds of millions of dollars in building a site. You need to make sure that you aren't going to have this kind of problem. Well, why is the DOE concerned? This is their first concern. Are you, when you do the injection, going to cause earthquakes? Why? Because number one, we've caused them. We've caused them in West Texas by injecting brine, salt waters. We have caused big earthquakes out there that have caused the public to know we're there. And the most thing we want to do in this business, I don't care whether it's oil or gas or CO2 sequestration, or if you're involved in enhanced geothermal, you don't want the public to know you're there. And if that happens, they know you're there. And the response is that the Texas Railroad Commission shut down. They ordered a reduction in the injection around that well in as much as 500,000 tons of CO2 per year from that one area. Now, I don't know what the next slide is. This is the slide that goes into that kind of documents that a bit more. You see this correlation, which is probably causing, with the amount of injection, the blue line, and the increase in seismicity. You can see we have some events up there in the red that were greater than a 5. And the response of the Texas Railroad Commission in terms of curtailing the amount that could be put into any given well has caused a leveling off or a slowing down of the increase in seismicity. Well, the real point that needs to be made here, in terms of the number, is that the economics of people who are planning to put CO2 away to meet the goals of the government and to meet their economic hurdles, they all talk about putting 1 million tons of CO2 away per year per well. As a result of these limitations in West Texas, the equivalent curtailment is at about 300,000 per well. So, and this hasn't really sunk into the market yet, that the induced seismicity is causing a curtailment of the ability to inject that is going to affect the economics of your project. Well, the solution is to go in there and monitor these wells as you're injecting, because we know that if you start to lubricate one of these wells and it starts to move, there will be small magnitude precursors that lead up to the large magnitude event. And if we detect those small magnitude precursors, we can cause or ask the engineers to slow down their rate of injection, to let the fluid leak off, and that will solve the problem of it should allow the tectonics to shut down the system so that we don't have any earthquakes. So our main tool for doing this is going to be the buried array system that we've been putting in the ground since 2008. We've got other tools, and I'll mention them in a minute, but for induced seismicity, it's this toolkit that we are putting out in the field. It involves burying geophones down in the ground, a few hundred feet, get away from the surface noise. These are titanium cylinders containing conventional seismic elements. We've been putting it in since 2006 or 7. Some of them are still active today because you're in a very passive environment. 300 feet, it's not high pressure, it's not high temperature. So we put them down, and on the surface, we have an antenna that has a box, keeps it away from the locals. Inside the box is a battery that gets trickle charged. There's a geophone setup, or rather a seismic setup, and a radio, perhaps a cell phone radio, that goes up that antenna, and we bring all the data back home over a 5G network. If it's cell phone, we might be using Starlink. We bring it back to our processing center, and we have these really well-developed pattern recognition algorithms that look for certain patterns in the seismicity that we're seeing in order to tell if there's something going on. And if we see that kind of pattern, there's two things that happen. Number one, we wake up the guy at the CCUS facility and call him in the middle of the night and say, something's going on, you ought to turn down the rate you're bumping. Second is, we get that lady right over there, we wake her up, and she looks at the data and she tells or answers the question, is that anomaly we're seeing real, or is it Memorex? Is it due to a train going by? Is it due to a truck going by, or is it likely an induced seismic event? And all of that then feeds into a standard stoplight system. Green, we're not seeing anything that bothers us. Yellow, there's a few things that have bothered us, and we've gotten Nicole out of bed. Red, we get the guy in the field out and we say, you better shut down because you're going to create an earthquake. You don't want that to happen. Now this is a part of the process of monitoring over the entire life of the field. We need to go out in that field and monitor whether or not there is ambient seismicity in the field, just to set a baseline. You don't want to be building one of these systems in an area where there's a lot of tectonic activity, because even if it's not your fault, you're going to get blamed for it. But if it's a pretty quiet area, we can then go and, while you're doing injection, we can monitor to make sure there's no induced seismicity and other things to see whether or not the cap rock has a high degree of integrity, whether you're broken in, that sort of stuff. And then after the fact, we need to keep monitoring. Clients are telling us that after they stop injecting, the government is going to require them to monitor for 50 years. And if you put that into the economics, it really makes me wonder why you want to get into that business. Well, I certainly want to, because I would like nothing better than to build a monitoring system that you're going to pay me for 50 years. So the seriatim of doing this is, at the beginning, we put in a small system just to understand the tectonics. And then once you start injecting, we're going to put a dense group of phones around your injection well so that we can track the activity that is the initial activity as you're injecting. And then as your plume moves away from the wellbore, we're going to add more and more phones so that we're completely covering everything you're doing. And then finally, when you stop injecting, we'll probably go back to something like this, a maintenance array for the next 50 years. So that gives us a scalar, modular approach. We start off 6 months, half a dozen stations. Then for 20 to 30 years, while you're monitoring, we grow that. It might grow as high as 150, 200 stations, covering your entire area of injection. And then finally, beyond that, we'll reduce the number of stations to a few dozen or a dozen, just so we cover you for the rest of the life of that field. And that's what I wanted to say. I want to emphasize, nothing more, that as we get into this CO2 sequestration business, you need to be taking into account the threat of induced seismicity, that hazard. And you need to mitigate it, but the technology to do it exists, and it's in the form of that buried array that I just showed you there. Now don't go away. I did it faster than I said I would, and I did. And I really did this just to draw you all in so that you could watch the next talk. Because the next talk is by Charles Cusack, who is the CEO of Recoil Energy, an oil and gas company, an independent oil and gas company. Charles founded it. Charles is an oil finder for a long time in West Texas. And he's going to get up and talk to you about his latest project in the Eagle Ford and how Microseismic contributed to that project with a buried array system just like this. So I would ask you for just a little bit of patience. Stick around. Don't miss this. And call Ashley and tell her to get Charles back here. You're going to enjoy Charles. Yes, questions. I'll take questions. This is called Stretch.
I'm helping you out here.
Yeah, you are.
Usually, if you're going to have a CO2 injection device or area, you want it to be pretty seismically quiet.
Yes.
So if you have a array buried there ahead of time, there is no damage seismic activity. What's the point of having all this?
You know, that's really good because isn't it a wonderful business where you monitor and hope you see nothing happen?
But then you wouldn't learn the tectonics either, right? Because some of the seismic data that you have can tell you about what's going down. So if there is no seismic data, then you don't know.
So if there's no active seismic, it's just that there are no earthquakes happening.
But if you have passive seismic, you still need some events to tell about, to get into data to tell about what's going on in the subsurface.
So what I would say to that is, if I put out an array and I don't get anything, I don't hear anything, and I've got a magnitude of completeness of a 0, then that means there's nothing 0 in magnitude or greater that's happening. And so that's cool.
I guess,
yeah. Which probably, exactly. And it's a wonderful business where you sense and you get nothing for years, and the client's happy. Yeah.
And then they have tectonic data for well logs and whatever else.
Yeah, usually, now they might have seismic, 3D seismic data, they may map regional faults, but if those regional faults are quiescent, then that's a good baseline to say, okay, there's nothing going on. Then, if they start injecting, and those faults start to be active, because we'll get their locations, they know they've got a sensitivity to it. There's a couple of things you do then, but mostly what you do is make sure you keep away from those faults when you're injecting.
And then you find out it's there. Well, it's there.
What?
Even in an area that's passive, far away, still
Yes. They use the faults as a conduit. Dangerous. It's better walking a tightrope. But Monica, I tried, but I didn't do good. I should have started recording it. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just moving
Okay, so as promised, here comes Mr. Charles Cusack, and CEO and founder of Recoil Resources. You can on right now.
Is there another mic or just take here?
You're going to take this one.
You've been a lot faster.
I'm gonna tell jokes. Yes.
Take it away, Charles.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you for the big audience. Appreciate it. So, Recoil Resources. You guys are industry. Toe down. So we just used microseismic to do a job. Through my career, we used them on a bunch of different, applications through the Eagle Ford mostly, some in the, different places, Haynesville, et cetera, But, we're a pretty mature field, and the question is, what are you still learning? Is it worth the money? That's the first question always. So we had some specific things we want to learn. And then some others, my philosophy is if you don't spend the money and acquire science, you'll never have the data to realize what you can do with it. A lot of times it's unintended conclusions you get. So I'm going to show you some that we hope to see and then some that we didn't know we were going to see as we went through. And it's going to be pretty brief, so I'm going to shoot through them real quick. So these are the different categories, and these are the things that I'm going to hit each one of them. And as we go through each one, these are like benefits that we had from shooting the data. And if y'all have questions, I think the easiest way would be just raise your hand or whatever during each category, and we can discuss it if you want to. And first, just as a preface, this was a surface array. So we didn't have the benefit of having a downhole well close. But as it turned out, it was easy permitting. We were in and out, and it was great data just from the surface array. We found out everything we needed from just the surface array here. And to give a shout out to ProFrac, they're the ones that completed our well. They did a great job. So these are 3 Eagle Ford wells. These 3 wells right here, blue, green, and red are the 3 that we drilled off one pass. We wanted to complete those and see what we saw. So we did do real-time monitoring, and the reason we did, because we had an older Hunt well in the field. We bought Hunt out of this field, and this was one of their wells. You see the orange vents on here. These are 100-foot vents. They had a couple of fracs that shot way down in the Edwards formation. Edwards is wet. That's a very high water producing well. So our thought was with real-time monitoring, we would, if we started to see those, we would shut down that stage or pump our diverters right then and try to keep them growing down into a runaway frac, basically. So this is a side view of our 3 wells and all the vents that came out of it. And we did not have anything that went with a runaway frac on it. So that was a benefit on it. That now we knew that, and our wells are not high water producers either. So we didn't prevent one, but we saw that we didn't have any. And this is a display that microseismic puts out afterwards. And it just shows the Eagle Ford is in orange. We had very good containment in the Eagle Ford. We fracked the entire zone. We got up into the chalk a little, but we did not get down into Edwards, which is wet. But here's where the real time came into play for us. We had one well, the 1H was longer than the 2H and 3H. You start at the toe, and you start fracking each one from the toe back. So the red stages is stage 1 would go 1H, 2H, 3H, and you keep going like that all the way up. As the 1H caught up to the 2H and 3H, you could see, I wish this had a pointer, I don't think it does, but we started seeing these events coming in to this well. So you had a very inefficient frac happening. And this well would have been a lot poorer well. We immediately decided to catch this well up to these two. So we started going 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3 until it caught up about here. Now instead of having all this energy going towards these, this is a very clean, very well confined, frac pattern on this well. So this well may have been half as good a well as it would have been if we hadn't done this. So it's a very nice real-time benefit that we saw. And again, if anybody has any questions, just throw something at me. It'd be all right. All right, this is. We got a. It's not going to the next slide. Anyway, I'll just, on this one, azimuth orientation, you kind of think you know it. Most fields, this confirmed it. You want to drill 90 degrees. You want to drill 90 degrees to your maximum stress orientation. That's where you can make your most efficient completion. Pretty basic, but it confirmed that we had maximum orientation, best orientation. So this is like probably the number one factor in every field. What's your optimum well spacing for that field? You drill too close, you have wells that are less than they could be, too wide, you're wasting space. So in this case, we saw that the vents cover an area there about 500 feet, 250-foot radius. So we think that this helps support what we think is 500-foot spacing is optimum spacing for our field. And so you can see this in several displays. One is a plan view with all the gray areas, non-fractured areas in between. And then in this gun barrel view, you can see the spaces in between. So this helps give us confidence we're going to tighten up on our spacing going forward. Okay, it's very important for reservoir engineers to model. Everybody wants to model where your frac's going, what's your height, what's your width, how many fractures you have coming out, what's the perf efficiency. But to get your perf efficiency, what you have to have inputs. So the inputs in this case are fracture width. Like I said, it's about 250-foot drainage radius. The height is, you measure the height. So that's two very important inputs. And then a real big one here, these are the number of clusters on the y-axis. On every single stage, they come up with how many clusters they think out of those stages are contributing. So you see out of our 16 clusters, you're getting about half of them, 7 or 8 are efficient. So every single stage, or every well has this, and they all look kind of similar, but so it's a very important input for your modeling. All right, a biggie here was we used diverters on this well, and now we're using on every well going forward. So we're trying to collect as much data to say, are these diverters working or not? So this is a typical job that you pump. So as you start pumping your job, your pressure increases, and here's where your proppant goes in. So you have your pad, you start pumping 100 mesh, and we pump diverter, and we pump our 40/70. So we have microseismic snapshots that cover each of these time intervals of the events that's in those time intervals. So these are a composite of every stage that are in this well. And this is the pre-diverter of the 100 mesh. And this is a stage stacked on top of each other for all the stages in the well. And you can see most of the energy was towards the toe of that stage. And then we pumped the diverter, and it started. You're still getting events down here, but a lot of them shifted back to the heel of the stage. And then once the 40/70, once the 40/70 went in, Now you're filling in all these fractures you've created with the 100 mesh, and it's a pretty good dispersion throughout the entire stage. So that's what you want to see. If we had to pump the diverter, everything would have been towards the toe of each stage. So how do I start the movie? Do y'all know? Okay. So we have a movie of stage 4 in one of the wells. There it goes. And so you start seeing the vents, you're going to start popping. I think it's going. Okay. The movie shows you get do I need to do it from here? All right, there you go. The stage is pumping as you go across. And so the vents are starting to pop. And so the blue are all the early stages in the 100 mesh. Now we pump the diverter. And you can see all these lighter colored ones are more towards the heel of that stage. So you went from kind of being here to being back here. So a good coverage of the entire stage. It's exactly what you want to see with the diverter. So bottom line is we found a lot of uses for this data. It was awesome. Well worth the cost. You know, you divide it between 3 wells and your learnings, and really what you're going to do going forward in all your other wells at the end of the day. In my opinion, every field should require microseismic, especially if you can do a surface array and lay it out. It's not as expensive. It all depends on your configuration and what you have to work with. And I would call Ashley Shaw. She's #1 salesperson, and she can hook you up. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer any. You're welcome. Not sure. Well, the $1 million question is how far out are your fractions? Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, how did it help you on your well spacing, ultimately, right? Oh, could you? Yes, you potentially could do a larger frac, which is much more expensive. You could. That's the trade-off. But generally, I think 4 wells at a lower frac, we do 1,500 pounds a foot versus 3 wells at 2,500 pounds a foot. You're going to have better economics on the 4 wells, in our opinion. Especially here, because of a bigger job, you have the potential to break through that Edwards I was talking about, and now you might water them all out. So it's, it kind of depends where you are, and it's unique to your area, and that's why it's so important to kind of like not take what you knew down in McMullen County and try to bring it over here to Wilson. Did we run a PLT? We did not. But you'd have to tractor them in, and this was our science budget for doing microseismic.
Fair point.
Anybody else? Where's happy hour? I've heard that TGS has one, and I think the Hilton is probably the best one. All right. All right, guys. Thank y'all.